Okay, I hope this link works on your computer. You can open it and yeah, probably something on my machine. So there is a table where it's described order of operator what we have. So you may be surprised, but some of them what you will see there is operator. So if we will look on our example, and we will try to figure out what of them has the highest value for the Java, we will notice that in this case the highest value has logical not operator. So we may translate as the following statement. So everything what has sign not will have kind of parenthesis. It's for simplicity. So, and the next step will be we will need to understand what will go further, and either logical are. So, and if we will look on the table, we will notice that and operator has higher value than or. It's on fourth level, not on third. So, do you look into this table what I have sent? Just to make it clear. So, and also important in which order it will go. So there is mentioned that it go from left to right. So if there would be two and, then this part would be executed first one and that one second one. But in our case, this one part going to be executed first, and here we will go false because they actually both are false, and when we will later it will be translated to false and true, and it is obvious that it will be also true. So yeah, this is the idea. On that example what I have sent is, oh yeah, it's open. There is few interesting examples what you can take into account. For example, that one when we have two divide operators. So, and there is shown how the Java will recognize set order for them. We will need to take a look to the multiplicative operators, and yeah, there is said that as order will go from the left to the right. So at first we will execute this one part, and only when it will be executed we will switch to dividing that one to 3. So yep, that is. And for the operator which has other way associate, you can read it, yeah. I can pronounce this. It will handle it in another way. So here at first will be executed right part, kinda inside of partners, and later when it will be executed, Java will switch to the next one. Yep, so get familiar with that. Yeah, it's everything, and we can go back to our new topics. Actually, it's the same presentation what you had previously. I just cut few first slides. Almost. Okay. We will start with variable scope. in order to get a bit better understanding where our variable is accessible and where its visibility ends and we can't anymore access it. So there are three variable scopes. It's inside of class, inside of method, and inside of block level. So, and it's kind of from block level we can access class level scope, and also we can access method level scope, but not otherwise, because it's like a one inside another. So from inside we can access outside level, but not the otherwise. So let's go into the class level scope. So it is fields of our objects. So here we can see there are two fields. It's A and C. It doesn't matter that it's declared after the method. It still belongs to the class scope. So, and both of them we can access in method block and also inside other block. So everything what is inside of method, it's method scope, but everything what is inside any other parentheses inside of method, it's separate blocks. So part what we have here, it's belong to this for loop. Okay, that's mainly everything. So a variable we can print out directly in method, I in some block. Method level scope. So what is declared inside one method, we can't access outside it. So if we define it in method 1 x variable, we will not be able to access it in method 2 in same class. So how we can understand that where a variable is declared? Mainly, actually, we can understand it where the type of this variable is defined. So let's just open something. So we have a few fields in variable scope, Y and Z, they are class scope, and they both are declared. And what you should be aware of, where is what actual scope of variable is. So it doesn't matter that we have set some value for that value inside of method. Its scope still is of class, and we can access it in another method. you may see that Eclipse doesn't say that something is wrong, but if we will try to access set some value to x, it will say that it's not, he cannot resolve the x variable because it's not declared inside this method. Again, declaration is defined by this one part when we say the type of variable and its name. Okay, and in order to distinguish our variable, what I have mentioned already many times, our class variable and method scope variable, we should use these keywords with class scope variable. It will simplify your life. Okay. And some block scope. So what is block scope? It is switch all loops like for, while, what is declared inside of them will not be accessible for us outside that blocks. So mainly we can understand where starts and where ends these blocks by these brackets. So, but there is you need to keep in mind that in case with for loop, I variable isn't accessed outside of this construction. So what is defined inside of for also not available for us. So keep in mind this. And yeah, if I will define some variable inside of for, let's give more explicit name, block variable. We can't do any operation with it outside of that block. So the block is ended here. You may, I hope you use the highlight of your IDE. Will help you to find the opening and closing brackets. So yeah, Java cannot resolve this variable because it's defined out of current scope. Okay, so another thing what you may need to take into account is that we may use a variable which is already declared before. So in this situation we can either reuse our variable what is declared before. So we will just use the same variable which is declared and initialized before and reuse it. When we will enter this for, we will set initially 0 value to it and continue work. Either we can rename one or another variable. So I would suggest to you to do renaming. So of such variables, of course, it depends on context what you have, but better that separate variable do separate work. So if we are using it for iterative, then we shouldn't reuse it later. So same is applied for the methods, which we it was mentioned that if we have some arguments, pass it into our methods and it has the same name as field of our object, then better rename it. If it's not some setter method, then try to avoid such situation when smaller scope variable has the same name as outer scope. Yeah. Okay, another situation when you, for example, need variable to be accessed outside of the scope. For example, you want to get the index of the last element, so which was in some loop. You may either mainly you just need to increase the scope of x variable for these purposes. For example, if you want to know the number of last element, and it's not accessible from here, and we kinda not able to put it here because every one element will be printed out. Of course, we can say do some condition, but in such way this condition will be executed each time while we iterating over the cycle. It's not optimal solution, especially if there will be some a lot iteration, and for example checking logic also will be too complicated. So for these purposes we can just increase the scope of our variable and what we already have. Checked, we can just move the declaration of this variable outside of for loop. Yeah, so and the last variable what is stored here will be available for us outside of this block. So it's few of solutions. And yeah, here is just few examples for you what you may try to execute for yourself and get a bit familiar with this scope of variables. Just play around. For some of you it may be too easy and you can do this in your head, but who doesn't feel himself comfortable enough with variable, just try to put one variable into one method and then into another and see what it will be. What if you will have same variable names in two different names? So if the variable name will be same in methods scope and block scope. Is everything fine? Okay, who of you has got some interesting errors? Okay, let's go further. I think you get some impression about the variable scope, how they work. If there is some question, feel free to ask me and play around with them at home. Okay, let's go further to next topic, constructor. So, each time when we are creating an object, Java under the hood uses constructors. It's such type of methods which are executed on object creation. So when we specify a new and class name, then Java refers to default constructor. Initially, we don't have this constructor in our class, but during compilation of this class, inside of our code appears the constructor. So, few points what we have to know about constructor before we'll go into the code and look for some examples. The constructor name should be same as its class name, so it starts from the capital letter, and it shouldn't start from the capital letter if your class name starts from the small letter. But as we know, class name you need to write from the capital letter, so and constructor name also should be from the capital. Constructor doesn't return nothing, and it couldn't be abstract, static, final and synchronized. For now it's not so important for you. We will cover these keywords later. And also there are few type of constructor, default and parameterized constructor, when we are able to pass some information into it. Okay, so let's create a new class. So again, you just watch on the screen, type nothing. Later I will share. So I'm just creating a new class, and here we will take an example of constructor on such class as pupil. I probably had some snip for that. Okay, so we have a pupil which has three fields: age, form on which he or she is studying, and name. We are trying to follow best practices, so we will use the getters and setters for that fields. And initially it's all. So what will happen when we will create new pupils? So we are doing all as usually. We just declare the variable of type pupil and do initialization of this object. So under the hood, when it's called this initialization, Java refers to default constructor. What actually looks like following. So it's quite similar to method, but it doesn't have return type. It's not needed to be specified, so just access modifier and the class name and parentness, where we can put some arguments, but later. So actually this part is added by default to Java during its compilation, so nothing happens. So, but how we may know that it's really executes? So let's print out there's some information. If it will be printed, then it means that it's executed. So here it is. So when this part is called, actual pupil is created. So we don't need exactly this part. So also when we will just create an object, but will not create a variable by which we can access it, constructor still will be executed. So yeah, first part is needed just to create reference to that object. So what for constructor usually are used? You probably have noticed that when we had homework with factory, we had some fields which could be defined initially, like factory name and factory location. We don't need them set. After, it would be probably good to define them at the time when we create the factory. So constructor is good to use when we need to set some values to class field on creation already. So I set some default fields. For example, we know that usually pupils, when go to school, they go to the first form. So we can set the form by default in order to not to do something like this. Pupils at age, let's say it's by default it's 7 age. Set name to let's call it Peter. So this information was kind of required quite often, so we may define it as default values. For example, we need to create some status of the pupil in order to simplify. Okay. Who asked for coffee? Let's create just a method. Let's return its name. Name plus age. Here we are doing just some output of user, and we will put it into console the state of pupil. Yeah, let's go by simple way. So we'll not do any magic right now. So yeah, you may notice that pupil has following state, and if we, for example, will not do this but set it by default here, this age 7, this age from first, so it kind of will simplify our life. So with each new pupil we will need to define the same fields, but the result is the same. So if we will create a new one, so that field, age and form, which we have specified in our constructor, you can just reminder, you can use Ctrl and click on the method and name, and it will move your current view to the exact place. You will see. So this field is defined by default.
If I would need different ages and forms, so when they're defining
so let's assume what is the usual flow? So when people go to school, it's usually go on first form, and it's 7. So it's easier to define them once and everything. If you need to redefine, you can change it later. Or we can have separate constructor for exceptional cases. So if, for example, pupil is older, it come from the different school to the 4th form, for example. In such cases, we may use parameterized constructor. So we may have multiple constructor in one class. But they should be different, so Java will not know to which one refers. So if we will have constructor with same signature, so it will mark it as error. So for these purposes, we need to make some difference between them, that constructors, and we can do it in following way. Same as with methods, we define arguments. Let's put name at first place. And here we will just set the, again I am using these keywords in order to distinguish the variables with which I am doing operations. And we can do the following. We just pass the variables which we want into the constructor. So what is the next? Age should be the next. It will be 8 and he will go to first form. So we are declaring the variable in order to refer to this pupil later, and print out of it. Here you can see that we have John, pupil, with our defined age and form. Probably it is easier neither write each time such amount of code. So what we can do else? So we know that we can have multiple constructors for same class. So it means that we can reuse some logic. For example, if we want to each time write something like do some additional logic. Oops. So we want to notify someone else that pupil goes to school. So we have kind of same information here. Here and see here. We need. It is good to reuse it, not to duplicate ourselves. Of course, we could put it into some methods like inform department, for example, and put it inside. So you know that we can reuse our methods inside methods and constructor. So and this information will be printed out. But in such situation, if this information should be part of initialization student, then it's better to put into constructor, and we can refer one constructor from another. So for these purposes, we may refer to it through this word. So if we will write this with parentheses, if we will write it just like this, Java will say to us that there is some recursion. So it's one goes into another, and if you don't control it, it may lead to some problem. So yeah, and by this we may refer to, we want to actually do the same logic what is here. So but we know that average pupil will be on first form, age of 7, and name will be default. So we can do something like that, and the result will be the same, but amount of code will become less, and we will have less duplication, what will simplify maintenance. So If, for example, it wouldn't be only one string, but there was multiple string of code, and we had them in one constructor and another, it same apply for the methods. And suddenly we would need to change the logic, and we would need to change everything. So we would need to do this twice. So it's good twice, it's a good way to reduce amount of duplicate. So yeah, write once, reuse multiple. So let's look at this case, what will happen here. Let's use our IDE, Eclipse, and assistant. So we press Ctrl and left click. It will redirect us to constructor, what we have. So, and here the next statement, what will be executed, it's this, and with some arguments. We are going here, and here we set age, forum name, and print out information. Okay. What we can spoil. You may notice that I have removed the default constructor, so constructor without the arguments. And Java says to me that few of attempt create new object people are wrong. So the constructor people is undefined. You may say why, but here was said that by default, if there is no constructor, it's created during compile time. Yes, but no. While we haven't defined any constructor, Java during compilation time will add it. But if we have defined at least one constructor, it will not create default. So you need to keep in mind this. So either you should use everywhere full constructor like this. New people. Feature 7, 8. Either you have to create it to keep default constructor if you want to have some default behavior. Okay. So what we know, we are able to create a constructor which will set some default values for our object fields if nothing is passed. We can create multiple constructors in our class, so we can create another one. For example, when we need only to define name, but everything else should be set by default. So we can do something like that and reuse it. So yep, and again you can see that we refers to that one specific constructor where is passed only name, and we pass that name to another one. Oops. Oh yeah, another one constructor with some predefined values, which is set by default. Okay, actually it's everything what I wanted to say about constructors. So let's finish the presentation. So yeah, we have covered it there is default constructor, which will be created for you by Java if you haven't defined any other constructor. And there is parameterized constructor. So what is the difference between constructor and method? Constructor is used to initialize your object and usually set some values already on initialization. So probably for people it's good person to set name when it's created. So constructor may be invoked implicitly, so if we will not define any specific constructor, Java will it call anyway, so default one. Yeah, it doesn't have any return type, but actually it returns the object, so what we assign later to variable. Its name should be same as the class name, and yeah, if there is no constructor, then the default constructor is created by the compiler. So method should return some value, may not return some value. It is, in order to be executed of this method, it should be called explicitly. There could be some tricks, but we will not cover them. So we should exactly call it. Its name could be any other name, but keep in mind that it couldn't be keyword. And best practice is to name method using camel style, camel case, yeah. Yeah, and method doesn't have any default methods. Okay, task. Let's create a class book which has fields author, page, title. I hope you will be able to select appropriate type of these fields. And yeah, please practice to do getters and setters. Just make your finger more familiar with typing method names. And you will need to create constructor which allows to you define all methods. So something like that. So it receives all arguments and you are able to define them. So there should be some constructor which receive only title and set author and amount of pages some default value. It's up to you. And try to create constructor which reuse another one. Most probably it will be you will reuse constructor which has all predefined values. So example of reusing was here, for example, when I have passed only name argument and later have reused the constructor which has all arguments. Yeah, probably I need to send this to you to simplify it a bit. Okay, please go on, play. Oh, yeah.
send links from the homework because they're clickable.
Sorry?
You send the picture.
Oh, okay, yeah, sure. They are in slide, but I will send them, yeah. Okay, I have sent to you homework, so who hasn't completed your previous task, complete it. Also, and rewrite it to constructors. Try to use getter setters, and there's some extra homework. So, yep, that's all for today.